Welcome to another Insight Show on this Reno Media Group station. It's JLynn, and I'm so excited this morning to be joined by Mike Kazmierski. He's the Executive Director at Strengthen Our Community. Mike, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so before we get into something that is super serious, especially in our area, chronic absenteeism, Strengthen Our Community, huge nonprofit here. Tell us all about you and about SOC.
Well, Strengthen Our Community is fairly new. We started up early this year, and the goal of the organization is to take on issues that are too big or too complex or really just important issues people may be working on, but they're not moving the needle. And so how do we get involved, bring a coalition together, and help solve some of these really big community issues?
And this must be something where when you saw numbers, especially from the Washoe County School District, as far as like kids being absent, you were really like, okay, we need to start an initiative for this because there's a lot more to it than I think people assume.
Well, exactly. We looked at what are the things that will affect the community the most in the next 10 years. And, there's a lot of things going on every day and people are doing great things, but what will matter in 10 years? And so we looked out 10 years and said, okay, what that means is we're probably going to get involved in things early like kids, education, childcare, things that will matter in the long term. And as we really dug deep, we found out that our chronic absenteeism, not just in Washoe County, but in the nation, is at an unacceptably high levels. It used to be here in the region around 15%. It spiked up to over 40% during the pandemic. And everyone said, okay, that's the pandemic. It'll all come back down. And then it only came halfway back down, and now it's actually going back up. So you look at those numbers and go, okay, what are we doing about it? And if you Google a plan for chronic absenteeism, you'll get nothing because there is no plan, because it's such a complex issue that the school district's doing their part and all the nonprofits involved in pieces and bits of it are doing their part, but there's no coordinated plan. So that's exactly the kind of challenge that we like to take on. And so we assigned chronic absenteeism and the goal of getting us back to pre-pandemic levels within 3 years as our top priority.
And I'm sure someone's listening and they're like, okay, chronic absenteeism, it just must mean X, Y, and Z. But what exactly does that mean?
Chronic absenteeism is, a lot of people want to say truancy. It's not truancy. It's you are missing a number of school days per year. 10% is chronically absent. 20% is severely chronically absent. So if you have 180 school days a year, 10% would be 18.
Right.
The school district now is averaging 33 days. Chronically absent. So when you look at those numbers, they're still at 95, 96% attendance on any given day. But I was just in a high school day before yesterday, and on Monday morning of a 500-person high school, they have 70 kids not show up.
Wow.
So you look at these things and you go, okay, well, what are we doing about it? And the poor principals and Washoe County School District has a really important job of educating our kids. And a lot of why those kids are not coming has nothing to do with the school district. So that's where the community has to get shoulder to shoulder with the district and help them solve this problem.
Right. And that could be anything from, external factors as far as like where you live or like your car and things like that. And I think that's so important with SOC to be able to be like, hey, there's not just one answer. Like a lot of people are like, okay, well, you're sick. Yes, that makes sense. But there's a wider range of what is going on than people just like not wanting to be there.
Well, we actually put together a task force that included nonprofits, the school district, and some people from Washoe County, and tried to identify to the best of our ability what are the reasons the kids are not showing up. And we've identified 15 different areas.
Oh, wow.
And reasons. So it's a very specific thing for each child that you can't just blanketly say it's transportation or blanketly say it's childcare. It may be for some families and others, but you've got to figure out why that particular child can't make it to school enough to be able to actually advance through the education system. And those 15 reasons are pretty complicated. I mean, everything from medical and attitude. The reality is, when kids had a cold 5 years ago, it was like, okay, here's a spoonful of sugar or whatever.
And
get the heck to school.
Exactly.
And now it's, do you have COVID? Do you have this? Do you have that? Okay. Well, and so we're panicking more about routine illness. I mean, That's okay. A kid's going to get a cold here and there.
Absolutely.
But if they're missing 33 days a year, they're either really sick or they're playing their parents.
Right.
And the parents may be overreacting or overly sensitive to a runny nose or a cough, or, if kids got a fever, they shouldn't be in school. We all know that.
For sure.
And that was the rule before the pandemic. It's not the rule now.
Yeah. And one of the things that you had said too was, this is different from truancy. And I feel like when you look at stuff, a lot of people are like, well, if you don't go to school or you've missed X amount of days, then, you're going to have to be held back and stuff like that. But that importance of distinction is very important.
Well, and we don't hold them back if they miss school either. So that actually complicates the problem. We advance them so that kind of negative incentive is gone.
Right.
So now we have kids that are making decisions that may, it's not truancy where the kid walks out the door and says, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to school, and then goes and plays in the park or something. That's generally not happening. What's happening is the kids either are sick or feigning illness. The kids either are in a position where they can't get to school because they have one car in the household and that parent needs to go to work.
Right.
And so transportation is a challenge. They may be inside the transportation circle. People don't realize that 40% of our parents in Washoe County School District are single parents. So if you're a single parent with kids and a job, and you got to feed these kids.
Right, you're going
what's
to
the
your
priority?
job. Right.
I mean, and if your job hours don't align with school hours, and there isn't before and after school care and all these other things, it really complicates the scenario. So there are things we can do as a community to help those parents and help the district get those kids back to school.
And speaking of community, I mean, I know there's such a, I guess this would be a broad question, but the community can help. I think it's just a matter of how. So can you explain how the community can get involved as well?
Well, it's interesting. We this task force took 6 months. And developed 15, identified 15 areas and put focus on 7 or 8 that we're going to put a lot of resources and energy into. And, I won't go through all of them, but an example is we believe every school should have a site coordinator or an engagement specialist, somebody who is there purely to talk to each of the kids that are not able to make it to school, understand their problems, and then work with the district or the school or the medical system or somebody to help solve that problem. And so it's a problem solver in every school. And you say, well, that's what the principal's there for. Well, the principal has a few other things to do.
I was going to say, I think they have some other things on their
don't they have social workers? The answer is no, most schools don't. And if they do, they're dealing with mental health issues and other things, not necessarily getting kids to school. And so you have all these other complications. So we found at Community in Schools, which is a national program, they provide that site coordinator in the school, and that site coordinator works with the principal and the district, as well as all the other nonprofits like Children's Cabinet and many of the others, Food Bank and others, to solve or at least mitigate the problems of that particular family so that that kid can make it to school.
And when you talk about students in the Washoe County School District, there are 23% of students who are currently, right now, chronically absent. And I feel like, when we had talked about this and I was like, oh, well, they won't be able to make it to the next grade. That's not a thing anymore, but the impacts are still there with you not going to school.
Well, what happens, and this is why I like to say this is the biggest problem in Washoe County. If I were to ask 100 people, tell me what the biggest problem in Washoe County is, not a one of them will say chronic absenteeism. And yet, in 10 years, this will change our community. Right. If we don't address this adequately, we are going to have double the number of dropouts. So you say, okay, 15% of 60,000, or 25% of 60,000, you're in the 15,000 range. So you got 15,000 kids that have a very good chance of not graduating if they don't show up at school, do the work, and actually get through the process. So that's double what we were before the pandemic. So you can pretty much say most of those kids will drop out, or many of them will drop out, which means when you look at our current problems, we're going to have twice as much gang activity, twice as much homelessness, twice as many kids born in poverty because these are young adults, so they're going to have babies that they can't afford because they're working minimum wage jobs because they don't have the education to get a job that pays well. You're looking at gang activity, I mentioned, and then homelessness, because at the end of the day, our rents are pretty high. And if you're making $15 an hour, you can't afford to live anywhere other than your car and maybe in the homeless shelter. So we've got all these issues that we're having a hard time dealing with right now that will double in 10 years. So are we going to wait for 10 years and figure out, wow, this is really a problem, or are we going to try and solve it now?
Which I feel like that number, because I'm even thinking about when I went to school. And a lot of times you'd have like one person absent and you'd be like, oh my gosh, like, where are they? Like, you would worry. I can imagine going into a class now, because now classes have 30 people and you have maybe like half your people gone and you're like, what is going on? Like, wouldn't you want to learn? I feel like that is so fascinating. And one of the things that you had mentioned too is there are so many different causes of why kids are chronically absent. Can you explain some of those root causes?
Well, again, we identified 15, but I'll give you a good example of when I was at the school the other day. One of the kids had a chronic earache.
Oh.
So they've missed a week of school with a chronic earache. Well, what are we doing about it?
Right.
Well, the parents are working. They come back, the kid has an earache, they can't go to school. Why aren't we getting them the medical attention they need? So helping that child get medical attention to, it's eardrops or it's this or it's that, is it something serious? Get them to the point where they can get back to school. So medical is a part of it. Adequate medical attention in a timely manner, not, okay, you got an appointment in 2 weeks, good luck, which tends to happen in many cases. So we have that care that's needed, urgent care to get kids there. Transportation is a big one. If you are, a single mother and you have a 12-year-old daughter that has to walk 2 miles to school through a dangerous neighborhood and it's dark, do you feel comfortable with that child doing that? And the answer is no.
Yeah, I would say no right off the bat. Don't even finish the question.
So that's the situation we're putting our parents in and our kids in. So then you say, okay, we'll go with 3 other kids and, let me know when she gets to school, which is what usually happens. Well, it's light. Well, let's say they have to have an after-school program. They have to stay late for something. They want to, a robotics lab or something, and then they come out of school and they're by themselves. Now they got to walk back home 2 miles by themselves. And most parents would say that doesn't fly. I mean, we got to. So that is the district trying to do the best they can on the transportation side, which is an incredibly big part of their budget that they have to address. But there may be other ways to solve that, and that's where the community needs to come in. I had a great example. Somebody told me a retired school teacher was noticed, teachers notice kids. They tend to do that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Noticed it's a school day, and there's 2, young kids playing in the yard across the street. Well, they're, 8 and 10 or,
the critical learning.
Reasonable age. And it's not every day. It's just a couple times a week, or once, 1 week and not another week. And so when the mother came out, she talked to her and said, hey, what's going on with your kids? And she said, well, I have them half the time and my ex has them the other half, but I got to get to work, and I work at TRI and I leave at 5 a.m.
Oh.
And I can't get them to school. And so this retired school teacher says, I'll be happy to take them to school for you.
Right, absolutely.
I'll do that for you. And that's where the community can step up, helping these kids and parents and families like neighbors, which is not something we do very much anymore. So the community can do a lot more. We had another case where this is, heart-wrenching when you think about it, but a kid was coming to school very erratically. And so the site coordinator, and having a trusted adult in the school is a big part of it, because the kid's not going to tell his teacher this. Right. Not going to tell the principal this. He's going to kind of keep it to himself, but finally develop trust with the kid who was running. Like, look, you need to be in school. This is part of your future. This is, doing all the things to try and motivate. And then found out that particular kid wasn't coming to school because it wasn't his day to wear the shoes. And you think, okay, this is the 21st century. How is that possible?
Right.
But we have real poverty in this community, and we're not, and pride, people are prideful. And so they're not going to say, I can't afford another pair of shoes for my kids. Yet we all, in one heartbeat, would go buy that
100%.
child, those kids, those shoes immediately. So sometimes it's just understanding the problem and then bringing the community resources around it to solve it.
Well, and I think one of the things that you had mentioned too about the person across the street is there's a difference between going in and being nosy and genuinely being like, hey, like, I've just noticed that this is something that's happening. And as someone who was a teacher or someone who had been a substituter, I also take my kids. They're the same age, like they're friends, they play together. I feel like that's super important, because if you know that your kid can do it and someone else can't, like, just help out. It doesn't seem that hard, and I feel like people make it a lot harder than they should.
Well, we've become very confrontational as a society in many ways. And so the first response is oftentimes mind your own business.
Right. Like I'm a bad parent because X, Y, and Z.
I'm going to call human services or child care on you, or so people get that. So that's when you have a relationship with your neighbor where the trust is there.
Yeah.
The other thing we're really focused on is childcare, because again, if you have that 12 or 13-year-old daughter and a 2-year son, and you got to go to work, and you can't afford childcare at $2,000 a month or $1,500 a month, or if you can even get in, then your daughter's staying home and watching your baby because you don't have a choice. You got to feed them. It's not like, oh, that's a bad parent. It's like, I want to keep them alive. That's kind of the first priority.
The only option we have right now.
So what are we doing about childcare and addressing childcare? We are, the Children's Cabinet is the lead on this. We're working closely with them. Our goal is to add 4,000 childcare spaces in the next 4 years.
Wow.
Again, it's a challenge the community's had for many years that we're really not taking on. So we're addressing childcare, and there's so many things we can do to help childcare. We have better in-home childcare, certified in-home childcare. Right now, there are HOAs that don't allow childcare, so we're trying to address that. But get more so you can have it in your neighborhood. So how do you help have in-home childcare that's more affordable? Then we're trying to get businesses to step up, because the reality is employees need childcare and businesses need employees. So while it isn't an employee problem, it is an employer problem.
You got to work together.
Because if you can't fix the childcare problem, you don't have the employees you need to do what you need done. So, but more and more employers have looked at it and decided not to have on-site childcare because they're worried about little Johnny bumping his head and then suing the company for billions of dollars. Well, there are ways to firewall that so you can have on-site childcare. All you have to do is provide the space, and we're going to come in and do everything else for you.
That's amazing.
And then it makes it available for your employees and for other employees in that area. So we're building a program to do that. Employers that are interested in that, we're going to have a call out. If you're interested, we're going to come visit you and try and figure out how to make this work. And the last thing is adding new spaces. I mean, we haven't added a lot of childcare spaces. We have 10,000, just under 11,000 spaces, and according to Children's Cabinet, we need 25,000.
Wow.
So we got a long way to go to 25,000. We'll probably never get to 25,000, but we got to get past where we are now.
Yeah, you got to try.
And so we're going to add that 4,000 in the next 4 years, and then if we have to add another 4,000 next 4 years after that, but getting a program that actually adds spaces.
And if someone is listening right now, they work somewhere where they've talked about this, if someone's an employer and they're like, oh my gosh, like we want to work with you because we need this, where is the best place for people to reach out and to be able to communicate with you guys about this?
Well, SOC, strengthen our communities is the key. Our email, mike@socnnv.org. And you can send us an email or, I think our website, there's some contact information there on the SOC, Strengthen Our Community website. You can connect through the website. I would encourage employees that want childcare to go to their employer.
Yeah.
And say, you have this 3,000 square feet over here that we're not using for anything because we have more people working at home now.
Right. Why
don't we see if we can't get a child care center in here? And so we can do everything it takes. We can, have it set the standards. We can get a provider there. We can do the insurance and protection, and all we need is a space. Yeah. So there are things we can do that our goal is to get 2,000 of those in-employer childcare spaces in the next 4 years. So we're building a plan to do that.
I love that. And one of the things that we did talk about was, academic progress. And I feel like that's one of those things where if someone is chronically absent, that's not only just going to affect maybe your likelihood of graduating, but it's also going to impact the rest of your life. And this is something that you guys really take seriously, of course, with chronic absenteeism. But talk about that, because if people continue to the next grade, just because you did it doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Well, it's first I want to touch on academic progress and the parents that are sitting at home saying, well, this is not my problem because my kids go to school.
Right.
I drive them to school, or they're in the bus zone, or my kids are always there. They're great. Okay, your kids are great, but they are being affected too, because when that teacher has to deal with, 20% of her classroom, 23% of her classroom coming in at different schedules, late, missing, and is redirecting a lot of their energy towards helping these kids try to catch up.
Right.
They're not doing their job in advancing your kids. So you wonder why our scores are languishing. It's because this is putting a huge burden on our in-classroom teachers too, and they're not able to be as effective as they need to be.
That's one of the, and I was just going to say, as you started talking about that, that's something that I didn't think about. That's like an extra load on teachers, because you're sitting there and you're like, okay, like we're going to do this lesson, but half your class is gone. You could be teaching a first grade class and it's like, hey, maybe there's only 20 kids. 10 of those are gone. You come back, you're going to have to repeat yourself. So it's like, yes, well, it's going to be ingrained in those 10 kids who came twice every day. It's not like the advancement is going to continue either, because you're stuck on something because people are gone.
Exactly.
That's absolutely insane. Now, I do want to ask, with the Washoe County School District and the chronic absenteeism, are there models of other districts that you guys have seen or places across the country where you're like, we want to do this because this is definitely going to help?
Well, we did extensive research. I mean, we spent 6 months developing a plan. We now have a plan we've produced that we're working on as a community. The district has been very good. New superintendent has made chronic absenteeism a priority. The principals are more engaged. So I think on the Washoe County School District side, they're doing everything they can. And every principal has a different metric and way to do it, and they call people. But at the end of the day, if the kid can't get to school and they don't have transportation, the kid can't get to school.
Right.
So we're trying to help the district potentially, if someone has a van that they could donate to the school that's not 100 years old. Mm-hmm. So they don't
with all those miles on it, that's like barely running.
And we would take it, we would tune it up, we would get it to the district, because I had the principal tell me, we have 10, 15, 20 kids that we could get here if we just, our social employee would just jump in the car, van, mm-hmm. go ahead and pick them up, and they would be at school. And so having some kind of augmented transportation at the school is something we're looking at. How do we do that better, especially in school districts or school areas that are, lower income, single family, more difficult, one-car families, that mm-hmm. kind of thing. So there are things like that make a difference, and where the community can be involved.
This could be a hard question. I feel like there could be a lot to it. But what is the message that you guys have for parents and students regarding not being absent so much? I feel like that's such a hard question, because it's like, well, we had talked about, I can't do this, or like, I'm trying to keep them alive, so I'm going to work. But not being absent and getting your education should be a very high priority, you would think.
Well, to me, it's pretty important. Mm-hmm. We're putting this as a priority. And my message to parents would be, where do you want your kids to be in 10 years? Do you want them to be in your basement where you feed them and they're pretty much, on your payroll for the rest of your life? Can you afford that? Mm-hmm. Is that good for them? What happens when they have kids? Now what happens? Because if they don't get an education, they don't get a job, they don't get their own apartment or house, they don't get the life that you want them to have.
And that was the first thing I thought when I was like, a lot of people always say, like, I want to give my kid the life I never had. But I don't know if people realize, which I think this is why this is so important, is because although, you may have the friend of someone who's going to school every day, by them not going, it's really not only hindering them, it's hindering you as their parent.
Well, I mean, peers matter and parents matter, and the more we can get parents to say the same thing our parents said when we were young, it wasn't school is not an option.
Oh, no.
This is not a wake up and decide. This is like waking up and deciding whether or not you want to brush your teeth. I mean, there's certain things you just do.
Yeah.
You should wake up and you're going to school.
Right.
And there is no ifs, ands, or buts. Okay, I get you a little cough. I get this. I get that. Here, you take this. Now get on the bus or get in the car. You're going.
Yeah.
And it's magically, and I can tell you with my two kids, magically how quickly they got cured in that process,
right.
Because by the time they got in the car, they were fine.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that world we're in that we are allowing our kids to make this problem worse than it is. Parents have got to be parents.
And one of the things, too, as you were saying that I was thinking of is I know a lot of kids that I was growing up with would always play the like, we have a really big test and I know I'm going to fail, so I just need this extra day to study. Well, when no one's home with you, chances are you're not doing that anyway. So if a parent is listening right now and they're like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know that my kids have been faking it, but I also don't know that they haven't been. what would you say to them? Because obviously it's their choice to take the stance, but it's also very important to realize what's true and what's not.
Yeah, I would say if you have a child that's missing more than 1 day a month, you got a problem. Something needs to be done. Because when it becomes 2 days a month, then they're falling behind, and their chances of catching up get harder and harder, and you're setting them up for failure in life.
To me, this is something that I don't have kids, but that I think about because it's like, I know so many people who did not go to school, and I've always been taught, like, you need to fall back on your education. Not all of us are going to be NFL players or play in the NBA. It's something that is super important. And if someone is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like this school is struggling, or like, my son's friends go here and they need help, where can they get all of the information to just make things a little bit easier?
Well, I would encourage parents to interact with their schools. Mm-hmm. The schools are very receptive to that. You get kids that say, I don't like my teacher. Well, I can't think of a whole lot of teachers that...
Right. Me either. I liked the one guy in 6th grade, I think.
But they were doing things that made it easier for me to succeed in life. And they don't have to be liked. They just have to do their job.
Yeah.
So again, part of this is the motivation. The parents have to hold the line. The school district has to be helpful in figuring out how to make it easier for the parents. If they have an obstacle, we as a community need to help solve that obstacle. But at the end of the day, if that, attendance matters, and if that child is not in that seat most of the school year, we're going to deal with them in the future in a very adverse way.
Right. And definitely not in a way that you want. We talked about this earlier, but I do want to touch on this again. How can the community, whether it's the Washoe County School District, any of the other districts, how can they help make education a priority?
Well, first, you got to believe it. And unfortunately, there are some parents, I won't say unfortunately, there's some parents that didn't have the opportunity, and they managed with their will and hard work to be successful without education. In this day and age, when technology is so important and qualifications for jobs are so important, and oh, by the way, a lot of those jobs that were available before are being replaced by technology, and the new jobs require more education, it's a new world.
Yeah.
So we, as a community, want to embrace this. And it's not just the parents' fault. It's not just the school district fault. We as a community, because if we don't fix this, then we're going to pay 10 times, 50 times more in the long run with the adverse impact of dropouts and crime and homelessness and children born in poverty and all the other associated issues that will happen.
Right.
It's already happening.
Yeah, it's not going to get any better. Mike, give people your information one more time if they want to reach out to you specifically to talk about this.
Well, Mike at socnnv.org is the email. And then 775-219-0005. But I would encourage, that's if they want to help on the community side, but I would encourage really the parents first to work with each other.
Yeah.
They could say, we're going to do this. Our kids are all going to school.
Yeah,
Whose day is it to drive? Carpools, this. some of that is happening, but not nearly enough.
Yeah.
And so that parents working together, parents setting boundaries. Okay, this is not an option. You may not like Mr. Jones, but you're going to school.
Right.
It's really not optional. And then ultimately, as a district, talking to the principal or they have a social worker at many of the schools. And then there are Community Health Alliance has medical opportunities where you may not be able to get your kid into this system, but Community Health Alliance may be able to see your child sooner and help get you help. So there are other ways to solve this problem. We're just more of a catalyst to get community involvement.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining me on this Insight Show. Love learning about the absenteeism and strength in our community. It's amazing. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you for your time.
And thank you so much for listening to another Insight Show on this Reno Media Group station.